Welcome to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and our guest today is Father Sirico, who is a priest with the Roman Catholic Church and also the founder of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. Father, welcome to the Renegade River Show.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Mike.
I'm fighting a cold today, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit if I can keep my voice long enough to make it through this.
Well, it's Michigan in the winter.
Oh, absolutely it is. Father, what I'm hoping to do is get a little bit of insight from you. And my question for you, and then we'll move on to a couple other topics, but start off with what's your interpretation of for I know it's a huge, broad topic, but the state of faith in America?
Well, I suppose it depends on the perspective you look at it from. Within the United States, as we look at American faith, there's certainly been a drop-off in terms of practice, in terms of public identification with faith, in terms of the reluctance of people to even do simple things like wish each other a happy Christmas, or, symbols in schools and all of that. From outside the United States, I spend a good deal of my time in Europe, and I'm of Italian ancestry. Americans seem to be very religious people. I mean, there are more, if the statistics hold up from the last time I read them, there are more people at church services nationwide in the United States than at sporting events on any given Sunday. So that should tell you how enormous the commitment is. But from our own perspective, we do know that there has been a cultural shift. I'm not sure how deep what that represents, because I remember 10 years ago, at 9/11, the people who, well, it's more than that now, but people who went to church really sent the numbers skyrocketing. But then it drifted off within a few months.
Right.
But that people have religion as a kind of reference point in their lives, I think, is significant. I think that in many ways the message of the church doesn't resonate with a lot of people in the way that it used to. So there have been real big cultural shifts in that regard.
It feels like, Father, that with the push against the church, or specifically Christianity, it doesn't feel to me necessarily like the concept of faith has fallen away, but the way it's manifesting itself, meaning digital. So if you get on the internet and go to Facebook has got a lot of different groups that are very
Right.
Christian drawn. So those folks may not be attending traditional church,
Right.
but they've not necessarily lost faith.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the internet gives a different way of communicating and a different way of forming communities. And I think, if we're honest, and I say this as a clergyman, the institutional church very often has failed people in our own fidelity to our own beliefs, failed people in the lack of professionalism on the part of our clergy, failed people in our leadership. I don't think that means the church is a failure. I think that it means that it's weak and human. After all, even Christ, in choosing his apostles, chose men who would abandon him at the most critical moment of his passion. So we've got work to do. We've got a lot of repentance to do, and we've got to be courageous in speaking the truth to people, which I think in the end is what will draw people who want what we have to offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So on one hand, it's easy to be a little bit negative when you look out across the culture, but I've got to tell you, I think human nature is to have faith, and as a Christian, I'm caused to believe that faith will be the foundation for America going forward, regardless of whether it's digital or in a traditional church.
Well, I hope you're right. The one thing is we have no guarantees. What we have is a guarantee at the end. The Scriptures tell us how things sum up. But all of that time in between now and the end, we don't know. We're not given an insight into that. So our job, Mother Teresa said it beautifully, our job is not to be successful, it's to be faithful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very difficult to argue with Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
Hey, if you would, Father, tell us a little bit about the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. What is that?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. We began the Acton Institute back in 1990 in Grand Rapids. It's now an international institute. We have an office in Rome. We also have affiliates in different places in the world, including Argentina and other places. Basically, it's bringing common sense, or bringing sound economics and common sense to noble desires. A good example of that, though doesn't exhaust what we do as our mission, is how many people want the betterment of the poor. How do we go about making the situation better for the poor? Well, you can have all the feelings you want about it, but if you don't have a concrete plan, if you don't know how to produce wealth, you're not going to be very helpful in getting people out of poverty, at least not institutionally and in the long run. So the Acton Institute engages the questions of faith, morality, and economics, and that touches a great deal of people's lives. It's our everyday life is involved with going to work and earning sufficient income. How does this happen? What are the moral dimensions of it? What ought to be the government's role in any given sphere of society? Those are the kinds of questions we handle, and we basically affirm the importance of religious tradition. We're an interfaith organization, mostly Christian, but we're not an evangelistic organization. We're kind of pre-evangelism. We prepare people for the gospel. We just have honest brokers, students, and scholars who study these questions, and then we apply the principles that we know to circumstances in life, like the poor, welfare policy, different kinds of questions that come up about immigration or regulation, taxation, things like this.
I think the motto, connecting good intentions with sound economics.
Yes.
Is that almost a call for capitalism within the Catholic Church, Father?
Well, remember that the Acton Institute isn't just a Catholic organization, first of all. Secondly, the problem with the word capitalism, which I use every now and then, but the problem with the word is that it, first of all, was coined by Marxists, and secondly, is too narrow in terms of what we're speaking about. Capitalism refers only to the financial dimension of the economy. What we want to say is that there's much more to the economy than the financial. There's the whole question of value and human beings and the decisions they make for their families. So, the informal answer to that is yes, we call for a rightly ordered, under the rule of law, system of capitalist enterprise. But I think a better word, a fuller description of it, is a free economy or a market economy or a private economy. That's the normative way in which people rise out of poverty and benefit themselves and their families and society as a whole.
And so the counter to that, or the other side of that coin, if you will, is, and I take a few words from a quote I found of yours, but you refer here to the moral bankruptcy of socialism. That's kind of the opposite of what we're talking about right now. Liberty and free market on one hand, socialism being the opposite. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, I think you are. The problem with socialism is that, and this is where a lot of people get very confused, they think that socialism means only calling for a harmonious society where there's this social consensus and all of that. In point of fact, the distinctive thing about socialism isn't that it calls for social consensus, because also a free market does that. It's how you get there. Under socialism, you get there by the use of force, by the use of regulatory agencies or government setting policies and the like. In a free society, you get there by various forms of cooperation, some that are competitive. Competition is a form of cooperation, a nonviolent form of cooperation. Also, harmonious activities where some people are better at doing some things than others are, and they trade based on their talents. This is called, in economics, the division of labor. So I think that the free society, the society that has a limited amount of government and regulation and taxation, promotes a greater harmony in society and also allows people to better express their value systems. Now, that could be good or bad, but at least it's free, and then that's where the church comes in to to help fine-tune the moral orientation of society.
You remind me a little bit, Father, I have to paraphrase, but you remind me a little bit of Ben Franklin when he talks about, I'm for doing good to the poor, but not for making them easy in poverty.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly it. The way I've said it is some people love the poor so much they create programs to ensure that we have more of them.
The safety net certainly has a safety ceiling that keeps them in place.
Yeah, we see that. We've spent more money on various poverty projects in the last 40 years than we have on all of the wars in our history, and what we see is that there are more and more, and generations of people who no longer know how to work, who have lost the habit of work. And I think this fundamentally disrespects those who are in need, that the way in which we help people. In fact, Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher, said the highest form of generosity, of philanthropy, is to create a situation where a person no longer has to depend on your generosity.
Absolutely, and we're very well said. When I look at the centers of poverty, for lack of better terms, the large cities, Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, and then across the United States and probably other places, it seems to me, and you talk about 40 years, it seems to me that those places where we have tried to help the most with socialism light, those places have actually gotten worse, not better, over that 40 or 50 year period of time.
That's not only applicable to the cities in the United States. You can do the same thing analyzing the world, that the countries that have the highest regulatory environment, the highest taxation, the highest government involvement, are the countries that have the highest amounts of poverty. That the governments or the countries that have the least amount of regulation and taxation, that have freer economies, are the most prosperous economies. And that means not just that some people have all of the money, but that overall people rise in their economic standards at roughly the same rate.
Was that Reagan's high tide lifts all boats?
Yeah, kind of like that. I mean, it's not trickle down as much as it is percolate up.
There you go. I like it. Absolutely. How does the Institute engage? I'm trying to figure out, how do you help advance that?
Well, of course, the Internet has made a whole world possible. So we have one of the highest trafficked set of Internet sites of the entire conservative movement. It's interesting. We're not the biggest organization in the conservative movement, but we have one of the highest trafficked sites. Our Facebook page for our project called Poverty Cure has over 1 million, close to 1.5 million likes on it presently. We also hold various lectures. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, we hold lectures. If you go on our website, acton.org, you'll see a list of upcoming things that are going to be occurring there in our building in downtown Grand Rapids on Fulton. Acton.org is the website, as I say, and you just need to look at lectures. We also have conferences around the world, including here, a large conference in June called Acton University, which is over 100 courses with about 1,000 participants from all over the world, Catholic and Protestant, Jewish, and even a few Muslims, who come and study the various dimensions of the free market. We call it a university because the courses are designed like a university set of courses. Everybody takes the same fundamental courses, but then there are optional courses. Nobody can take all of them, obviously, in 5 days, but it gives you a sense of what we're doing.
Back in 1990, did you have an inkling it would get this big?
I can't say that. We really didn't look 25 years down the line. We just kept our nose doing what we were doing. And then it just kind of unfolded. We just took the next logical step each time. And so that's almost 25 years of existence, and we've grown from a staff of 2 people to now in our Grand Rapids office about 40. And then, our other affiliates and everything brings us up.
That's pretty significant. Within the Catholic Church, Father, is there any pushback from the Church against a conservative, or in this case, free market organization such as Acton?
Not the institutional church has not. No, because we teach, first of all, again, to emphasize, we're not a Catholic organization, though I am a Catholic priest. But no, there are people within the church who have different opinions on economics. From a Catholic perspective, economics and economic policy are not dogmatic teachings. In other words, they're not things like the doctrine of the Trinity of the virgin birth or the right to the dignity of human life from conception till natural death. Those are undisputed, fixed doctrines. Economics are prudential questions. So people can have a variety of different interpretations based on the data. And so we make the case. So we have a lot of friends in the church and in very high places in the church, and we have some people who are critics, and we welcome that. We welcome the conversation.
Then it could probably be said that there are probably as many progressives versus conservative within the Catholic Church as maybe within the general public.
Yeah, I think Catholics tend to represent the general public on most matters, for good or bad. I think especially here in the United States, Catholics have been preoccupied historically with fitting into the American experiment. And I think, to be honest with you, I think Catholics have fit in a little too much.
Well, I think that may be changing as we go forward with this, what at least in my view appears to be a war against Christianity. It seems like the Catholic Church is maybe most under attack, but best fit to deal with that attack.
Well, I think it seems like we're most under attack because our institutions are the largest and we're centralized. So, this HHS mandate, which I think is a clear violation not only of the right of religious liberty, but also the right to private property, is a good example of that, and I'm glad to see the bishops standing against that. Things like the right to life, euthanasia, and other things, the sanctity of marriage, which are not within the purview of the Acton Institute, but nonetheless represent deep religious concerns in the United States, are also in the midst of great debate and hostility toward the traditional churches that support what we've believed for 2,000 years.
When you travel about in other countries, Father, do you find that there's that level of debate over, for instance, you mentioned right to life? Are other nations that you've been in, are they having that same kind of progressive versus conservative debate, or are they tend to be more left than us, or what do you think when you're visiting other places?
It depends on where you are. I think on the question of the right to life, it cuts differently in different countries. For instance, you can meet a person in, let's say, England or Australia, who on the economic spectrum is completely, socialist, but who on the question of the right to life is firm and solid. It's very interesting. In the United States, it breaks down liberal and conservative. There are a few exceptions here and there. But in Australia and England, for instance, it breaks down differently. In other countries, it's just not talked about, and in yet other countries, it's just coming up. I mean, in France, if you want to be completely confused, France is considered one of the least religious countries, and yet there is a vibrant pro-family, pro-marriage movement within France, even being led by homosexual activists who want the right to their privacy in terms of the relationships they have, but say, this doesn't mean marriage, because what we are doing is not marriage.
Right.
It's a very interesting scramble of ideas and associations.
Yeah, I think, and on the homosexual issue of marriage, America's, to me, I think there's two different issues going on in America, and certainly tell me if you think I'm wrong, but it feels like the proverbial, the leadership of the gay community are not necessarily representative of the gay community that I know of. And my example to that is I had an aunt, she's passed away now, but she was homosexual, had lived with the same woman for 30-some years, and her retort was whenever she would see the big marches or whatever in San Francisco, she always called me boy. She'd say, boy, if I wanted to get married, I'd have found a man. Meaning that's not what she saw. She saw marriage as between a man and a woman.
Right.
And then that's not what this is about. But she would also articulate that when she saw them acting very counterculturally, she said, do we live like that? That's not how we live.
Right.
So, I mean,
I think there are a lot of people who are invisible
Right.
who do live, these much more conservative lifestyles in terms of, juxtaposed to the organized gay movement. But I think where we have failed as conservatives, as a church movement, is to really express an authentic concern and respect for people with whom we disagree and for people with whose lifestyles we think are sinful. The fact that you may have thought your aunt lived a sinful life, to the extent that you could know that, didn't mean that you loved her any less or that you would treat her with any less respect. And I think that's the thing we have to communicate. It really, oddly enough, is the message of tolerance that the earlier gay movement insisted upon, which they seem to have lost sight of now.
I first off, I absolutely agree with what you just said, but I think that goes across our society. An example is that next week we're going to have the chair of a county Democrat, the chairperson for the county Democrat Party, and his counterpart, the chairperson for the Republican Party. And my point in bringing that up is that to the words you said, that we disagree doesn't mean we have to be vitriol and disrespectful and all of those things. We've got to reach.
There's been too much of that already.
Absolutely, it just doesn't do anything.
Right.
I've had different guests on the show that I vehemently disagree with on most of the issues, and the folks that are on my side of those issues will get very frustrated with me because I'm not screaming or arguing. When I'm watching television, frankly, Father, as soon as people start arguing, I change the channel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like. My favorite TV show on politics was Firing Line with Big Bill Buckley, and he always would let people have their say,
right.
And it makes for a much more interesting conversation because if you let the other side have their say, then you're going to have a better argument.
Absolutely,
you have something to argue about.
Yeah, to me, we'll learn more, and I think the foundation of what we need to do is communicate. But Father, we're out of time. People can go to the Acton.org, is that correct?
That's right, acton.org.
Very, very good. Father, thank you very much for being on my show.
Thank you.
Are you one of the many Americans who undergo CPAP or BiPAP therapy? Replacing your supplies every 3 to 6 months is critical as bacteria will build up and worn-out straps cause leaks. Call Allied Medical Supply Network and speak to an expert agent who will set up a schedule for your supplies to be delivered right to your door at little or no cost to you. Call Allied Medical Supply Network today and rest easy.
Call 800-284-2512. That's 800-284-2512.
This is a national health alert from Worldwide Medical. Are you on Medicare? And do you suffer from back or knee pain? Have you tried injections, pain pills, or even had or considered surgery? If these examples apply to you or a loved one in pain, stop. There is a better way. You could qualify to receive a pain-relieving back or knee brace at little or no cost to you. You'll receive free information, free delivery, and all the insurance paperwork is handled for free. Best of all, there is little to no cost to you for the braces. Call 1-800-282-6789 to get all the details. It takes just a couple of minutes. These amazing braces have helped thousands of people in severe pain, and you may qualify to have yours delivered directly to your door at little or no cost to you. Call 1-800-282-6789 right now. This may be the most important call you make all year. That's 800-282-6789. Call now.
There is a new catheter that hurts less, and you can get a free sample by calling this number now.
Pain and urinary tract infections have been avoided by many of my patients. The eyelets are polished, so they glide smoothly and effortlessly across your sensitive skin. Medicare and your insurance will pay for up to 200 of these catheters per month, all at little or no cost to you.
Call now for your free sample. It will arrive with a complete 90-day order, and if it doesn't reduce your pain, we'll pick them up for free.
Attention hip replacement patients. Several metal-on-metal hip implants have been recalled, and a jury recently awarded $8.3 million to one hip replacement victim.
Metal-on-metal hip implants can cause excruciating pain and may require expensive surgery to replace. If you had a metal-on-metal hip replacement and it's been removed or it needs to be removed, call the Goldwater Law Firm right now.
I'm attorney Bob Goldwater.
Metal-on-metal hip replacements can be dangerous. If you have a metal-on-metal hip implant, even if it hasn't failed yet, call us right now. You may be entitled to substantial compensation.
The manufacturer of your defective hip implant should have to pay for your medical expenses and your pain and suffering.
Your time to act is quickly running out, so call us right now.
If you have a metal-on-metal hip replacement and it's been removed or is causing you problems,
call 1-800-540-9516. That's 1-800-540-9516.
Welcome back to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and joining me on the line now is my guest, Norm Hughes. Norm is the chairperson for the Michigan Conservative Plan and also chair for the Michigan Freedom to Work. He served in 3 different senior level positions, policy positions, I might add, in the Reagan administrations, and I know he was very, very active in between all of those. Norm, welcome back to the Renegade River Show.
Great to be with you, Mike.
It's great to have you back. Listen, when we had John a few weeks ago, and some of the things that we touched on in that conversation was prevailing wage education and some taxpayer investment, different ways of looking at taxation. And I'm really excited to try to dig a little bit deeper into those 3 topics. But if I can, let's start, Norm, with prevailing wage. I know you're working on that. Tell me what it means and where we're at right now with that crusade.
The federal government has the Davis-Bacon Act that says that basically any federal government work has to pay the prevailing wage in the area, which is typically defined as the union wage, which is typically also several dollars an hour more than what the average person makes in the area. So it's a kind of a misnomer. Well, Michigan also has a prevailing wage law, and over the last decade, we have lost $2.24 billion due to costly prevailing wage, denying Michigan taxpayers the equivalent of the cost of 317 new elementary schools, as if we needed more elementary schools. So it's about $224 million a year that we're paying more on just education alone, paying a higher wage. I can give you an example. I've got a brother who has a moving and installations company in Livonia, and the cost of a carpenter to him is about $30 an hour. When he goes on a prevailing wage job, it goes up to $59 an hour. I was with a guy yesterday who was in the pipe fitters union, and he had to pay on prevailing wage jobs into a pension plan that he had no hopes or expectations of getting any money back for. It wasn't his regular plan, but it's something the union taxed onto it to be a prevailing wage thing. So it artificially raises the cost of government, and we all pay that in higher bills. If you can imagine that $224 million being available for education as if education needed more money, or for other purposes, or to reduce in taxes. It's just a unreasonable thing that's been done. Now, last year, Bay City, a lot of local governments have this too, but Bay City opted out and saved themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars on contracts last year. Eaton County opted out, and they're finding the same experience. So it's an insidious tax to basically pump up the unions at the cost of the taxpayers.
So just so that I understand that, right, what we're really talking about is if there's going to be a government project, whether it's a road or a school or anything in between, rather than canvassing for best quality work, best price, we're looking for a political resolve with wages instead. Is that?
That is correct. And you only have about 17% of the eligible contractors who will bid a prevailing wage job. And so you've got 83% not being able to compete, those 83% paying in tax funds the cost of work that's being done by people they can't compete with. So we don't get the best price or the best quality or the best timing because we're using a smaller pool of contractors that have got a sweet deal with government that protects them over the competition.
There's a road being built out near where I live. It's a bypass, if you will. It wraps around Grand Haven, and I'm watching the folks move that. And I don't want to be disparaging against the workers, but what's astounded me is the amount of time it's taking for them to do everything, especially since I know that we're paying them is at the extreme top end of what the market will allow. Again, rather than looking for best quality, best time, best pricing. To me, that's an amazing concept. And it reminds me a little bit of when Harry Reid said that he's not concerned with constituents, that he represents the government, not constituents. And it's that same kind of mentality that would cause people within the government to think that this is a good thing to do.
Well, I would submit he's also representing the sweetheart deal for the union bosses who take advantage of the union workers and as well as the taxpayers. It's just a sweetheart deal. It isn't appropriate in a free market economy.
How do we stop prevailing wage? What's the steps to get us back on the path of common sense?
Well, if this road you have is partially funded by federal funds,
it is.
It probably is not going to be able to take advantage of elimination of prevailing wage. We want to repeal Michigan's prevailing wage laws. We happen to think we have a majority in the Senate. If we can get the Senate majority leader to move it, and we're close to a majority in the House, and so we need to make the public aware to be able to put some levity on the legislators to finally get this done. It's just not fair that they're paying so much higher in taxes.
Do we know, Norm, where Governor Snyder is at on this topic?
I don't know that he's taken a public position. I've talked to him privately about it, and since it was a private conversation, I don't think it'd be fair to say what he indicated, but I don't think he would oppose it.
Okay, that more than fair. You're telling me, though, that it's a legislative action and not a ballot initiative or anything like that. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is a law. The law has to be stricken.
Now, is it likely that the union is going to push back? So, in other words, it's one of those things where it spends forever getting tossed back and forth of yes, no, and tied up in court, et cetera?
Well, remember, it's only 17% of the contractors that are weighed in on this, and the other 83% would like to have the opportunity to compete. But it is a sweetheart deal, and you won't only have the unions pushing for this, you'll have the companies that are benefiting by it because they can charge more and they make a higher profit on prevailing wage jobs than they do on other jobs. Now, it doesn't happen to be true in my brother's case because his industry is so competitive, but in many cases, like the mechanical contractors in Metro Detroit were just so against this and right to work because they have this deal going and they can charge more and they like it. So you're going to be fighting certain special business interests as well as the unions on it.
It's amazing. It would be like if Renegade River contracted with all of the other people that sell the type of products my store does, and we all just, in fact, were protected by some type of legislative action that allowed us or even directed us to charge at the maximum rather than what competition dictates. And, the public wouldn't stand for that, so I'm surprised that such a large segment of the public isn't up in arms over this, or maybe they are.
Well, we will have them if we do our job. We'll have them up in arms. We'll have them working on it. We'll have them talking to their legislators and making it happen. It's kind of interesting, even within the prevailing wage lexicon, a prevailing wage project on the private sector side of the curb is $10 an hour than the public sector prevailing wage on the other side of the curb. So we're really getting bilked on state and local and county roads because we're paying about $10 an hour more than even the normal union prevailing wage.
I remember when the governor, in fact, it was in the first year of his administration. Somebody, one of the grassroots volunteers that indicated they were working with Tea Party groups and other grassroots leaders on his behalf, came to talk about increasing tax for roads. And my comment, this is before I knew anything about any attempt to push back on prevailing wage, but my retort at the time is that I can't support that as long as Michigan and the governor refuses to change the way we're contracting for business. So it's kind of refreshing to hear that this is in action.
Well, let me give you another one. I met with the governor on this when he was talking about we're spending $3.5 billion a year on roads in Michigan, and he wants to take it to $4.9 billion. The Road Builders Association, I guess, have convinced him that if he kicks it up $1.4 billion more a year or $1.2 billion more a year, it'll be adequate to do the job. But we don't get warranties on roads in the public sector like we do in the private sector. It's amazing how many big potholes there are on roads that were repaved just 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
So why don't we be smarter in our contracting to allow more competition, allow better specifications, better engineering, and require warranties.
Yeah, it does come down to customer service, and that's certainly never, at least not for a long time, been part of the equation. And it's kind of, if you look at the historical nature of what's going on, you have over 100-year period. You started out with the big billionaires of the 18th century, or 19th century, I should say, building trains and railroads and all of that. And there was a populist push back against people with that kind of wealth. But it almost feels like we've went from one extreme to the other in how we're dealing with these type of public infrastructures.
Well, my dad used to say when he was taking to the steer to the cow that he was servicing the cow, and I think we're being serviced too much by government.
I think you're absolutely right. Hey, on a slightly different note, I would be remiss if I didn't try to get you and I to kick around education in Michigan right now. What's your take on what's going on in our educational environment?
We are throwing money at it and getting mediocre results. We keep on upping the budget, and the quality flatlines. We're not doing any better. Right now, Michigan is the 40th most expensive. We're 40th and best in quality in the country, at the second to the fifth most expensive, depending on which study you see. And America is the second most expensive in the world, second only to Switzerland, and we're 31st in quality. Some studies say as low as 34th in quality. So a typical Asian or European student might be studying in a 600-year-old building that does fine, thank you, but getting 50% more instructional hours a year, and they excel compared to these so-called modern American schools. These modern American schools not only are not teaching the 3 R's, but they're no longer teaching American principles, American exceptionalism, and so they don't have the basis of what the founding principles are and how we got where we're at. So it's a dumbing down of American society. The United States this year may graduate about 60,000 engineers, while India will graduate about 450,000, and as many as 600,000 in China. So we're just not keeping up. So we have to uncloak the sacred cow that demands more and more funding in smaller and smaller class sizes while flatlining on quality. It's interesting that the second best secondary school in Michigan is East Grand Rapids with a 29-to-1 student-teacher ratio. The fifth best and the 18th best have got a 39-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio. So this myth for all these years that we got smaller classes, all it does is create more employees, 85% of the education money going to employees, and they're not being held accountable. For many years now, the teachers' unions have been putting forth a program they call Elect Your Own Boss. They've been hiring or been supporting candidates for school board that are supportive of their positions. So you have both sides on the same side of the table. You have the spouses of teachers, or a teacher in one district who runs in another district where he lives, and so you have this going on constantly where we have no accountability in education, and it's business as usual. Now, education spending has increased so much that we've been spending more on federal government on education than defense since 1991, and it's grown up in all available sources, federal, state, local, and other funding since 1990. This year, of course, the governor's proposing another $340-some million increase, and next year another 2%, another 6% on secondary education. So the cost per pupil has gone up from $2,991 in 1960, a little over $5,000 in 1970, to almost $13,000 this year. It's just going up and up. While the math scores are flatlining, the reading scores are flatlining, the science scores are going down, and we're just not getting a good bang for our buck.
Now, you're primarily talking about K through 12 right now. Is that correct, Norm?
Primarily, yes.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is in fact, I've talked a lot about it on this show. For me, what I find very frustrating, and I don't know the numbers like you do, Norm, but when I look at it, you've got, through that K through 12, you're looking at 13 years of formal education that's been highly paid for by the taxpayer. And what we're ending up with is a student, if they did well, that frankly doesn't really have any marketable skills. So myself, in my life before opening Renegade River, I did a lot of hiring. And what I found is that before I could teach a young person how to do the job, I had to teach them how to learn, because up until that point, they'd only been taught how to memorize. So it seemed like, or it felt like, the teachers, or the way the structure was built, I don't want to necessarily blame it entirely on teachers, but the structure seemed to be built, you're going to take a test on Friday, and I don't really care if you can associate or understand what it is you're learning. As long as you can pass the test on Friday, you don't even have to know it on Monday. That's okay. So we've really not been building critical thinkers. I find that problematic would be an understatement.
Especially when we're spending 35% of our total state budget on education. And in addition to that, it's the debt they're ringing up. The retirement system debt is upside down by $41 billion right now. We have school debts, local school debts of about $19.7 billion. That's not million, $billion. And we have total annual spending on schools, federal, state, and local, of about $32 billion a year. So it's not that we're not investing in it. We're investing in it, and yet no matter how much we invest in it, the lexicon of the union bosses and the teachers is it's never enough, it's never enough, it's never enough. So I think at some point in time we have to recognize that you just can't keep throwing money at something that isn't working. You have to get something that works. And so there are alternatives on what can be done. We certainly have the opportunity, I believe, to look at school choice. We have a program. There's a Michigan Education Concerted Task Force that's been working on this for several years, and in addition to defining the terrible return on investment, they've looked at alternatives that work in other places, not only in other states but in other countries, and they're looking at what's starting to work here. You're going to have a large increase in virtual education. Some kids just learn better at their own pace and their own set of circumstances, especially in this day and age when everybody's so computer savvy among the kids. So,
right.
So that we're going to have that. We're going to have more guilds, people actually learning something. A lot of parents are looking at it and saying, I'm not going to go into debt $120,000 for a bachelor's degree in basket sewing or psychology, where you can't get a job. You know, it's something that I think a lot of them are going to look at it and saying, I think I'm going to teach you to be a carpenter or a plumber or a mechanic or something that where you can get an instant job and you can learn learn from experts in the field. We've got a thing we call EduCard, where if it costs $13,000 for a kid in public schools, perhaps we give the parents $6,000 or $6,500 on a credit card and say you must spend that on education, and you can choose the best way to get your kid educated. Not only would it save the taxpayers a lot of money, but it gives the parents a lot of choice on how to do it. If they want a homeschool, private school, religious school, virtual school, if they want to band together with some other, I can imagine, for example, if you had a dozen high school kids that wanted to be chemists, who would best be able to teach them chemistry? The public school teacher who teaches from a textbook that's outdated and doesn't have a clue as to what's happening in the industry, or maybe those dozen parents putting some of their EduCard money together to hire the chief chemist at Dow to come in and tutor these kids, tell them what's going on in the industry, what the trends are, what the jobs are going to be in the future, and make connections that they might have a chance of apprenticing or working in. And so I think there are alternatives there that have worked in other countries and in other areas much better.
I agree with that. Norm, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, I'm going to want to talk with you a little bit about the central planning of education, Career Line Tech Center, and then the curriculum that our K through 12 are wrestling with. Folks, we'll be right back.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
Welcome back to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and we're on the line today with Norm Hughes. Norm, when we left off, we were in education, and I want to pick up there, if we can, for a little bit and talk about central planning. Conspiratorialists told me a while back that during the Industrial Revolution that there was a push within America, within our higher culture, elite, whatever we want to label them as, the push was, according to this fella, was to, I don't want to say dumb down, but to get folks to where they were not critical thinkers, and because they wanted lever pushers and button pushers and people that were not constantly challenging authority and not thinking. I don't know if you're following what I'm getting at, but he said, according to this fellow, he said that our education on a federal level at the time, the culture on the federal level within government looked to Europe and to try to determine what they were doing. And that's about, they kind of copied that, if you will, took over the central planning that they used and began a 100-year push towards central planning. Does any of that make any sense to you?
Not at all. And this Common Core standards that the state legislature has just eventually passed, the governor pushed very, very hard on that. It's the states are being bludgeoned into that by the Race to the Top program that the Obama administration is pushing through. And Common Core standards are driven by a private sector group that are making huge amounts of money on it. And so the cost to the local school districts are, in some cases, well over hundreds and thousands of dollars to be able to push this program through. And they're going to teach to a certain set of standards. I agree we need a measuring stick, but this idea of this international standards, when we are, of course, way behind the internationalists, and the standards are actually proposing here in Michigan and in the United States are a step down from what's happening in a lot of the other countries that are ahead of us. But the big thing is they are not teaching the basic education that we knew. For example, in math, they've dropped all algorithm-based math. There you have this new math or Chicago math that teaches by trickery rather than by understanding. So it doesn't set the foundation box that you need to be able to become better and better in that subject. I know several high school students that recently have graduated that don't know their multiplication tables. They're just they're dumbing it down. They're teaching junk science, even in the lower grades. It may be a story problem in English or some language arts thing that starts introducing as a given fact this global warming, for example. So they're trying to use this process to rethink America and get us bought into this internationalism.
Right. I can tell you from my own experience. Of course, I'm 53, so when I tell you my experience, I'm referring to 1970, 71, 72. I went to parochial school through 6th grade, and then went on to public school from 7th forward. And what I was working on in the 7th grade in public school, we're talking early mid-70s, was what I was working on in 5th grade at the parochial school. But aside from how hard we're pushing people, when I look at the curriculums itself, to me it's scary. You've got, and I've mentioned it on the show before, you've got in Michigan, last time I saw the number, you had a high school, those folks that graduated high school, 25% of them were going to graduate from a 4-year degree. And so then you go back to high school and look at the curriculum, and it's well into the mid to high 90% range of college preparatory courses. And I think, I'm not sure why that adds up.
Well, I've got a son-in-law who's a professor at a couple Michigan institutions, and he tells me the incoming students are just, so many of them need remedial education because they're just simply not prepared.
Right.
And it isn't necessarily a matter of urban schools or poorer schools doing this. That has little bearing on it in many cases. It's just lousy local instruction. I mean, you got people locked into a system and into a set of regulations and state laws and so on that do not allow the teachers to innovate and be the best they can be.
When I look at it, I think it's kind of, obviously the teachers and the curriculum and central planning and all of those things play a factor in it. But what worsens it is that each generation is a little less prepared to help their own children. And so it seems to be the gift that just keeps on giving, and I mean that in the most negative sense. So a person now my age that didn't receive the education of the generation before me, I mean, that's that's the foundation then that I tried to help my children with, and it gets worse with each generation. So what I'm getting at is that I think that parents play a critical role in whether it's a good or a bad result with their children, and part of that even goes back to the family unit, which has changed greatly in yours and my lifetime.
The statistics indicate that parents who often read books with their children, regardless of the family's socioeconomics, and continue engagement with their 15-year-olds have a much better achievement. Students who attend out-of-boundary public schools and charter schools significantly outperform similar students who go to their local schools. The parents can choose rather than the public system in some cases the kind of work and the kind of quality their kids can get. The kids who took advantage of school choice, for example, had academic growth 82% above the state average in reading and 72% above the state average in math. It's just astounding. And it's interesting because kids that are achieving very, very high in a public school are not going to transfer to a charter school or a private school in most cases unless they want a religious instruction or something. So the vast majority of the students that are being dumped into these all-choice schools are the lesser schools, and yet their achievement is so much higher.
Yep, absolutely. You know, another fascinating, and when I say fascinating, another very sad but fascinating circumstance is if you look at inner city schools where the populations are largely black, those folks probably want a voucher system or some kind of school choice system more than anybody else that I can think of, and yet largely their own political party that they largely support, when I say that, I'm talking percentage at least, is who stands in the way of causing that to be a reality.
I've built, my profession is architectural engineering, and so I've built some schools in the urban areas, parochial schools in particular, and the vast majority of the students there were students of public educators. They were sending their kids to the private schools.
Right.
One of the problems is, of course, in some cases, parents not being involved. But Singapore only accepts the top 30% of applicants to be teachers. Finland only the top 20% in academic ability and literacy. And in the United States, the education majors tend to be from the lower end, the lower third of ACT and SAT scores. So we have to figure out a way of getting the better students involved. And one of the impediments is, of course, tenure and certification. You can't get somebody who I could teach in college and have taught in college, but I couldn't go and teach a math or science or architectural or engineering course in high school because I'm not certified.
Right.
So it's a way in which they hold out competition. And then, of course, one of the other problems with the public schools is that in many states, for example, Michigan, as of 2010, had 8,800 public school teachers and 105,000 administrators. So you have non-teaching staff more than you have teaching staff. And, of course, like I say, 85% of the budget goes to that. So when you have 20% more non-teachers than teachers, you're not investing in the things that really make a difference in the classroom.
Absolutely agree. And on the path that you were talking, I know folks that are adjunct professors. Am I saying that right, Norm?
Yes.
And on the higher level course, but those, to your point, are not allowed in high school. And to me, that's mind-boggling. That's where the bridge is broken by not getting people who actually do and achieve in their helping children to relate to the concepts of success and hard work and work ethic. And there's a huge disconnect in that arena.
Now, I want to give a disclaimer here because I think there are a number of very, very dedicated and qualified teachers that would do better if they had a chance.
Agreed.
And I think that the compensation system is certainly adequate in most cases, but I think that some kind of a merit system to reward excellence is maybe an appropriate way of making sure that those who do the best are rewarded. There also has to be accountability. One out of every 57 doctors lose their license to practice medicine and 1 out of every 97 lawyers lose their license, but only 1 out of every 1,000 teachers is fired for performance reasons.
Yeah.
So there's no accountability.
Just an outrage. We're not looking at what tomorrow is going to do for our young and for our nation.
It's a sad state.
Yeah. The other missing thing in this ingredient, I've had a couple different debates with folks on this show in the past, but Career Line Tech Center to me is an absolute lost opportunity. Something that several weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I had a senator on that when I got on this, he told me I was thinking old school. And after that interview, I went out and reached out to a couple different instructors at Career Line Tech Center to find out whether I was wrong or not. And both of them, without me asking, without me feeding them, without me loading their lips, as it were, expressed to me that Career Line Tech Centers have become a dumping ground for people that the high schools did not perceive as being academically minded, that some folks from alternative school had been shifted in, some folks with learning disabilities have been shifted in, and none of those were necessarily the right path to have Career Line Tech Center be all that it can be. And when you look at the curriculum of 90-some% college prep in traditional high school, and a Career Line Tech Center that could have been fostering the growth of future plumbers and electricians and et cetera, it's just, to me, it's a lost opportunity.
Isn't it a shock when after 5 years of education and somebody finally gets their bachelor's degree, sometimes stretched 6, 7. I had a friend that just had a son graduate after 7.5 years, and they may make $15, $20 an hour, whereas the kid studying as an apprentice for a mechanic gets $85 an hour to repair a car.
Hey Norm, we're almost out of time, so I gotta stop you for a minute. I keep hearing that the Democrats are saying that Governor Snyder stole $1 billion or hid $1 billion or taxed $1 billion or cut. What are they talking about with $1 billion cut?
Well, it's kind of interesting that there was a bump of money under the stimulus that they got from the federal government for a period of time under the Granholm administration. It was for a limited amount of time, and when that time expired and they got that big bunch of additional money, it wasn't replenished by the federal government, and they're claiming the Snyder cut that. Well, he really didn't cut it. He's actually taken the public education up considerably. Last year, again, going up it's up $454 a student or something like that. It keeps going up, but and they've been doing certain things to incentivize better schools, so the amount per student in direct money may not be going up, and in some 1 year, I think 2011 went down a little bit. But it didn't go down net. What they did was they put some of that money to encourage schools to do better, and schools that did better got fully reinstated, and so they didn't suffer any punishment. It's the schools that were lackers, who wouldn't respond, who wouldn't get better, that had a slightly lower reward from the state government. And so actually public school funding just keeps on going up and up and up. So I think the Democrats are really wrong on that, and I think Snyder is wrong to keep throwing money at a bad problem.
They keep trying to convince us that more is better.
Well, again, 85% of it, if they can get a teacher teaching 10 kids instead of a teacher teaching 20 kids, that's twice as many dues-paying union members, right?
Yep, no question about it.
So I think the legislators deserve some kudos for teacher tenure reform and freedom to work, which I think is going to straighten out some of this.
Absolutely. Norm, we've got to bring it to an end there. But listen, I appreciate you being on the Renegade River Show again, and thank you very much for everything that you're out there doing.
Thank you very much. One last note, if I can. Article 5 convention is going to be for the House Committee on Thursday. If people don't want to have an Article 5 convention and open the Constitution up to all kinds of voyeurism, they should let their legislators know.
I would be very opposed to that myself. Thank you very much for that update.
Thank you, and God bless.
Folks, we'll see you next week.
Brought to you by Renegade River.